From the studios of Staten Island Community Television, you're watching In the Bleachers, the TV show for the world's most passionate sports fans. Hello, everyone. I'm Jaime Hixson. Usually, you see me here talking to my friend Hector Boza, who's on the telephone. Hector, unfortunately, is still under the weather, but hopefully he could join us next week. But in the meantime, we still want to hear from you guys. So if you want, call us up at 718-727-0143. And as always, we have past shows of ours on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And you can also contact us on Snapchat and Instagram. And what a time it is to be a baseball fan. Not only are the Yankees playing terrific baseball right now, it's also the draft. The Major League Baseball draft is taking place right now as we speak, which means the next crop of Major League hopefuls are looking at MLB Network or MLB.TV right now to see where they're going to wind up down the road. And it reminds me of a time when some of these players that are in the majors right now used to be either playing Little League ball or Sandlot ball or in high school or American Legion ball before they wound up turning professional. And this also reminds me how special this game of baseball is. This game has almost 150 years worth of roots in this country. Roots that go back to a time when we used to have 3 baseball teams in this city. We had the Yankees, we had the Brooklyn Dodgers, and we had the New York Giants. And back in those days, we had 16 teams, 8 in each league. And you could barely recognize the sport right now from what it was 65 to 70 years ago. 65 to 70 years ago, that's when it was in its golden age. But now, times have really, really changed. We have 30 teams. They're using instant replay now. The game has become a lot more international now than it was back in the day. But the best part about this great game of baseball is that it still has its sense of history. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about that history right now with a really, really special guest of mine. Meet Andrew Mele. He's a really cool author who has written 6 books, 4 of them on baseball, 3 of them on the Brooklyn Dodgers. It's really great to see you again. How have you been?
I've been fine. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it is such a pleasure to have you here on the show. We've got a lot of reminiscing to do.
Oh, boy, I'll tell you.
Just to give you an idea of my time as a baseball fan, I'm 46 now. The very first Yankee game that I attended at the old stadium was 1977. My father told me about the time that I kept begging him to take me home because I was tired. My first game at the old Shea Stadium, 1978. The Reds were in town, and everybody was chanting, not "Let's go Mets," but "Let's go Pete," as in Pete Rose, because Pete Rose was in the middle of his 44-game hitting streak, which to this day is a National League record. That is the extent of my baseball, I guess you could say, fanaticism. But there is a lot that really piqued my interest about this sport, which is also why you're here. You go back to a time when this city was epic for baseball. We had 3 teams, all 3 of whom were very good. The only difference was the Yankees were dominant. They had guys like, and we're going way back to the very beginning, from the Babe to Lou Gehrig to
DiMaggio.
Joe
He
DiMaggio.
was the next one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Then there was Yogi.
And Mantle.
Then there was Mickey Mantle. Then there was Roger Maris. And in between, a whole bunch of guys that the fans really could identify with because they always, not only were they really good players, but they always seemed to come up with that one clutch play
Right.
that always decided a game.
My father used to always say they're money ball players. Mm-hmm. That's what they were. When the chips were down, when the money was on the line, they came through. But you remember something else? It was before free agency. Mm-hmm. And so these guys were there year after year after year. And it makes for better baseball because they played together, they knew each other. And everything was better then, in my opinion.
And that was also the time of the so-called reserve clause, which pretty much bound every single player for life. Excuse me for the interruption, folks. Unfortunately, we wound up getting a little bit of a interruption there. Anyway, as it turns out, because of a man named Curt Flood, who did something as simple as refuse a trade from the Cardinals to the Phillies, free agency has dominated not just baseball, but every game today. But when the reserve clause was around, you were right. The game was so much better because we were able to identify better with the players. And a good friend of mine, Joel Bibula, always told me stories about how he used to live just a couple of doors down from Pee Wee Reese. He used to always go to Pee Wee's house every single time just to talk to him. But in those days, Dodger fans were really, really, really proud of their players. And it wasn't just the product on the field. They were proud of these players as individuals. Do you have a favorite Dodger story?
Oh God, there's a million stories. The thing about it is you have to understand, it was another era. It was another time, not just in baseball, but it's so clear in baseball how it was. They called it the last golden age, and as you pointed out, there were 3 teams in New York. But remember, between the great period for the Dodgers began in 1947, Jackie Robinson era. From 47 to 57, it's 11 seasons. 10 of those seasons, one of these New York teams was in the World Series. 7 times they played each other. Mm-hmm. So when I was growing up, we thought the World Series was part of the season. You know, in New York it was. It just went on and on. But it was great baseball. I don't know, favorite Dodger story. There's just so many things that happened, so many memories in Ebbets Field. When you talk today about, person like myself, a purist or a traditionalist, I say, hey, the old days, and it was great. And people say, come on, Ebbets Field was an old, antiquated ballpark. Yeah, it was.
It was also yours.
Yes, you sat behind a pole, and you didn't have the first class, 5-star restaurants, and you had a hot dog and peanuts. That was what you had. But it's what the times brought. It's the way things were, and we loved it. We loved it. And living in Brooklyn, of course, you could walk to the ballpark, as we did many times. You had fans who actually became famous. They're written about in books like Hilda Chester, and the Symphony, the Dodger Symphony Band. They were a bunch of guys from Williamsburg, and they used to bring their own instruments in, and they used to have to sneak in because they wouldn't allow them to bring the instruments in. After a while, they became so popular that it was Branch Rickey who gave them seats behind first base, Section 9, which, some people relate that to the military mental case. They were in Section 9. But they were very popular, and the people were a part of what was going on. Like, they used to have a thing when an opposing player made an out, he'd go back to the dugout, and they would play ba-bam, 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 ba-bam. And then when he got into the dugout, he would sit down, and as he sat down, boom, they'd hit the drum. Well, the ball players would have fun with it. They'd try to trick the band. I remember a guy who did it a lot, Ralph Kiner. He was with the Pittsburgh Pirates at the time. And he would go back, and before he sat down, he'd start to sit. Then he'd walk over to the end of the dugout, and he'd take a drink of water. Then he'd come back. And sometimes it'd be 3 pitches into the next batter, and you'd hear boom. And everybody, oh, look, they got him. And Hilda Chester was another one. She was a lady that used to sit in the bleachers. She had the cowbell. I sat near her a number of times because she was always in the bleachers, and she would ring the cowbell and scream and yell. And there's a story that they write about that how she affected what was going on the field. Pete Reza was the center fielder for the Dodgers at that time. And she's sitting up in the center field bleachers, and she yells down to him, "Hey, Reza!" She had a rasping voice. "Hey, Reza!" And he turns around, and she crumples up a piece of paper, throws it down to him, says, "Give that to Leo." Leo DeRocha was the manager. So the inning ended, and it was about the seventh inning of the game. And Reza comes running in, and as he's about to go into the dugout, he stops for a second. Lee McPhail is in the president's box. He talks to him for a couple of seconds, and he jumps in the dugout. Then he's in there, and he says, "Oh, Leo, here." He gives him the paper. Leo looks at it, throws it on the floor, starts cursing, walking around, kicking. Well, the inning ends. The Dodgers had maybe a 2-run lead. They go back in the field. Whitlow Wyatt is pitching. First guy up gets a base hit. Leo goes out, takes Wyatt out of the game, brings in Hugh Casey. Casey comes in. He was a little shaky. They did hold on and win the game. But in the locker room, DeRocha is really, really mad. And he's saying, he's stomping up and down, "I'm the manager of this team. I make the decisions." And he points at Reza. He says, "Don't you ever give me a note from McPhail again." And Reza says, "McPhail, that note was from Hilda. The note said, Wyatt's losing it. You better get him out of there." So she's in center field, and she's making pitching changes. You know?
Oh,
But that's the experience. That's the kind of experience it was to go to Ebbets Field in those days.
I'm curious to know more about the look of Ebbets Field and the sound of Ebbets Field, especially on game day. How often did you go to Ebbets Field, and what was the sound of the stadium like?
Well, I started, that I remember, was 1947. My father told me he probably took me before that, which I would guess would have been just a year before. But I would have been very young. I don't remember. I remember 47 clearly, because I used to cut things out of the papers. I made a scrapbook and all that. And from there until 56, I once estimated I probably went to about 20 games a year, something like that. So a couple of hundred times I was out there. And, we had there's all kinds of things. You used to, the PAL used to give you free tickets for the game. And there was another thing you used to save up. I don't know what it was, a milk company or somebody, or the ice cream whatever it was. You used to save up things, and you got free tickets and all that. And that's where we used to go, in the bleachers. 60 cents at the time was the bleacher seats. The sound, it was, everybody was your friend, because we were 99% Dodger fans that were out there. And it was always, I guess you might say, a happy sound, because everybody was always cheering. And a lot of times you saw people you knew only from being at Ebbets Field, like maybe in certain seats. But the one thing about the Dodger fans, and I read that all the time, old players will say they knew baseball in Brooklyn. And one of the guys was, I interviewed, for this book, Carl Erskine. I got friendly with Carl Erskine because I spoken to him a lot. Marvelous man, wonderful pitcher, and one of the very few, unfortunately, still with us. And Carl used to say, we love the fans in Brooklyn, but he said the one thing we had against them is they used to cheer Musial, and the guy killed us. Killed us. Musial used to hit. He must have hit 600 in Ebbets Field. But, his nickname was the man.
Stan the Man, yeah.
He got that in Brooklyn. He was, Bob Brogue was a writer from St. Louis, I think the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and he was in Ebbets Field, and he heard somebody say, here comes the man. And he said, you mean that man? No, the man. And so he wrote an article about it, and it caught on, Stan the Man. But he was very popular in Ebbets Field. They loved him in Ebbets Field. I don't know
That's
why.
really amazing. Usually, fans don't cheer for a particular player, specifically an opposing player, with that much enthusiasm. But he really made that much of an impact in Brooklyn.
He did. I mean, he was a nice guy too. I mean, that came across. So I guess people liked it. But no, he was. I was asked a question one time: what opposing player would I have liked to see? Any opposing player from the era on the Dodgers? And I said Musial. I said, love to see him play in left field with them during those years. He was a phenomenal hitter, and he did his worst at Ebbets Field.
Well, that brings up another question. Who would you say were Dodger fans' most hated opponent? Individual player, that is.
Probably anybody from the Giants.
Any Giant.
Yeah, the Giants and the Dodgers had a rivalry. Now, it actually went back to the turn of the century, to the early years. But, you know, it started with McGraw, when McGraw and Wilbur Robinson had a falling out. But, and there were incidents along the way that highlighted it. But in DeRocha was managing the Dodgers. And DeRocha was a no-nonsense guy. He was he wasn't a popular guy off the field.
Yeah.
Hanging around with gamblers and everything else. But he was very popular in Brooklyn because he was tough, and you know he fought hard. But in 1948, in July, he went over to manage the Giants.
Yeah, because of the feud that he had with management.
Right, and the time came, and Ricky, you know, they worked it out so that he'd have an opportunity to go over with the Giants.
Didn't he also get suspended for a year because he was gambling?
1947, he was suspended for a year for his detrimental to baseball.
So he missed Jackie Robinson's rookie season.
He did. And Ricky was counting on that because he was favorable to Robinson, and he would have been a good influence because he'd be out there fighting, you know, every minute. So that was another part of the history that you don't see too much about, but it was really tough. It was really tough. And as a matter of fact, there's a trivia question: who was Jackie Robinson's first manager in the major leagues?
It was not Leo DeRocher. It was somebody else.
No, it was Clyde Sukforth, who was a coach. He managed the first 2 games while Ricky was running down Bert Schotten. Schotten was a friend of his, and he was working as a part-time scout for Ricky. And he was someplace in the country. I think he was in Florida or something. And Ricky got a hold of him, and he said, don't say nothing to anybody, just come to New York. And he went to New York, and he told his wife, I don't know, Branch wants me to come up there, I guess, to talk about some prospect. He went up there and he said, I want you to manage the Dodgers. And so he took him over. And with all of the conflict, with all of the trouble, with all of the racial this and that and that and this, they won the pennant that year. Won the pennant. And they had what I still feel was the most exciting World Series I ever saw. And it kind of affects me more than the 55 when they won.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of it, you know.
Now, tell me more about that 1947 season, specifically about the very first time that Jackie played for the Dodgers. I really don't think that this era can begin to comprehend how critical his debut on the Dodgers was that day, 71 years ago. What was your impression of him? And also, what was the Dodger fans' impression of him?
Well, they said it could only happen in Brooklyn. I don't know if that's how true that is, but it has the ring of truth. I'm not aware of any problems that happened at Ebbets Field. I mean, you went to Ebbets Field, there were black people, white people. I don't really remember any trouble. And I made the point to somebody. I said, you know, they said we in Brooklyn were tolerant because We made no trouble for Jackie. We allowed Jackie to come here. But I said, if he broke in with a Giants uniform on, we would have hated him, and we would have been called bigots.
Yeah.
Because that's what it was. It wasn't the color of his skin; it was the uniform he wore. That's what made the difference. And he started out a little slow. He wasn't hitting at the beginning, which is understandable. But his forte was running the bases. I mean, the guy was incredible because I never saw anybody start. You know what they say about a car? You know, you step on the gas, you go from 0 to 60. That's the way he was.
Yep.
He went from 0 to 60 in 2 steps. I mean, he could stop and he'd be in a rundown, and he could stop and jockey back and forth. It was really amazing. He wasn't the fastest guy. He ran fast, but he wasn't. There were other faster runners. But so he was very exciting. And once he got going, once he started hitting, he was so accepted in Brooklyn that he was just part of the whole process.
Didn't Jackie steal home in a World Series game against the Yankees?
Yeah, that was 55.
The
one
famous
where
first championship.
Yogi was still complaining
to
about
his
he died.
Up until the day he passed away 3 years ago, he insisted that Jackie was out.
Well, he might have been right. You can't tell from the pictures. Like today, when you look at some of these things they do when they check, you know, they stop the game for 4 minutes, and then they look at the pictures and all that, and then they make a decision. But if you look at the pictures, a lot of times they're not definitive. Well, you got to remember this. In those days, the plate umpire wore the balloon. Yeah, it's a big thing. It's a pillow, and he's behind the catcher, and he's got to look over the catcher to see that play underneath.
Right.
I bet dollars to donuts that Summers, who was the umpire, couldn't see that play. He had to judge. He saw him go down. He probably saw the foot come under the glove, and so he had to go on that basis. So Yogi may have been right. I don't know.
Well,
but Jackie he was his type of ball playing. You know, it stirred up the club. He did in the same series. He rounded second it was a base hit to left. He rounded second, and he egged Howard in left field to throw behind him to second base. He made such a big turn. Howard threw to second, and he went on to third. That's the way he ran the bases, and it unnerved the team. You know, it unnerved the ball clubs a lot of times.
Well, Jackie was one of just a plethora of terrific players that the Dodgers had at that time. And I know you're going to really feel young again when you hear these names. Duke Snider, Pee Wee Reese, Gil Hodges also, Carl Furillo. Let's see, Don Newcomb,
Carl
Erskine, who you had mentioned before.
Yeah. Roy Campanella,
who was an outstanding power-hitting catcher back in his day.
And one of the most underrated players in history, because his name doesn't come up as often as it should, was Billy Cox, a third baseman. I never saw a better third baseman in my life. And a lot of there's a story, Casey Stengel, when he was managing the Yankees, he's on the field talking to Brooks Robinson. And he says to Brooks Robinson, hey, number 5. He says, you're great, but you're only number 2. And Robinson said, who's number 1? He says, number 3 over in Brooklyn. That was Billy Cox. He was phenomenal. But he only had a few years. And another, I'll tell you another pitcher. You talk about pitcher, Preacher Rowe.
Yes.
Preacher Rowe. They were always, the Yankees had a little edge in pitching because they usually had that one more starter. I mean, they had some great pitchers in those days. They had Rashi, Reynolds, Lopez, and then Ford. And you had guys like Tommy Byrne that used to beat the Dodgers in those World Series games. But Jerry Coleman once said, he said, if you give the Dodgers another starting pitcher, he says, nobody would have beat him.
Amazing. Well, of every single player that passed through Flatbush, who would you consider to be your personal favorite?
Oh, my hero, initially, like I said, around 47 or so, my favorite was Dixie Walker. And he was traded after the 47 season. And I wasn't playing. We didn't have Little League baseball in those days. So you started about 11 or 12 years old was the first time you got on. And when we got on a neighborhood team, by that time, which was 51, my favorite was Pee Wee Reese. That's why I became an infielder, because we were just kids in the neighborhood. I want to play here, I want to play there. I said, I'm a shortstop, because Pee Wee was my guy. But that's what it was. Pee Wee was my favorite. But it was like, if you had one favorite, everybody else was second. Because there was, you just saw so much in all of them.
So
In all of
true.
them.
I actually passed through the Ebbets Field housing projects many years ago with a best friend of mine. Little did I realize that I was passing through a piece of history.
That's right.
Because that was the Mecca, one of the Meccas of baseball, and it just so happened to be in our hometown.
Yeah. It's a special. It has a special significance in baseball history.
I am curious to know, though, especially during the rivalry with the Giants and also the World Series of the Yankees, did Brooklyn fans ever cross over into the Polo Grounds or into Yankee Stadium to catch their Dodgers?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
How were the fans during those days?
Well, the rivalry was so great that's what made it great. The Giants and the Dodgers, there's never been anything like it. They played 22 times a year. And if you went up to Polo Grounds, you had a handful of 10%, 20% were Dodger fans. Same thing in Ebbets Field, were Giant fans. You'd go down in the corner to the grocery store, you buy a pound of bologna, and the guy cutting the bologna was a Giant fan. Next thing you know, you're in an argument because we were all over each other. It was true with the Yankees also, except that the Yankee rivalry was limited to the fall. In those days, you didn't have, 35 playoff games and, third place teams in the World Series and all that. It was the best team in each league played in the World Series. And they didn't see each other until the World Series. So it really had significance. That's missing today.
I'm curious to know more about Jackie, though.
Yeah.
When did you and every other Dodger fan first realize, what was the first sign that you guys saw that this man was going to be someone special on the field?
I think early in the 47 season. Because everybody knew about it, the first black player, this and that and that and this. I was a kid. As kids, we weren't moved by that kind of thing. You know what I mean? It wasn't an important thing. And I guess had my father, and he had three brothers. We all lived near each other, and they were all baseball fans, all Dodger fans, and they never said or did anything to indicate any kind of racial thing. So as a 7 or 8 year old kid, it didn't affect me. I knew it was a special thing going on and all that. But I think once the season got going, early in this, once he started to hit, which was probably around in May or something like that, he started to get going. You knew right away what he was, and of course the club was fighting for a pennant right from the get-go. So and he was in the middle of it. So but again, it was such a great team that you had a tendency to support the guy you liked, and it may have been somebody else that you were rooting for.
Was Ebbets Field packed for the majority of home games?
Yeah, they'll talk about today. One of the things that annoys me is that they, when they do these things and they don't give O'Malley credit for stealing the club. The attendance was going down. It wasn't going down. The key was a million. That was the key. 1 million. If you had 1 million fans, that was the magic number. And the Dodgers had 1 million every year, all the time. And the biggest, there was a big increase from 55 to 56 because they won the World Series. But one of the questions they say that Jackie Robinson brought in, well, he didn't. In 46, and then in 47, they averaged about, I think there was less than 1,000 per game increase when he was there. That's because they were already doing over 1 million And in those days, that was your epitome, hitting a million. But the games we had, there were generally good crowds. I mean, it wasn't always filled. We lived close enough that sometimes, like on an evening, after having supper, we'd go sit in the living room. My father and I, we had one of those little Dumont 6-inch television screens, and we go watch the game. And my father looked at it and said, "Well, hey, look, they look like they got seats out there. You want to go out?" Yeah, we jump in a car and we drive out to past Prospect Park. My father was a cop in that local precinct, the 7-4. And he would pull up on the grass in Prospect Park, put his police card in the window, and we'd walk across the street past the Bond Bread Company right to Ebbets Field. And there was always a mob of, it was like a street fair. There was always out from about a block before the ballpark. It started hot dogs, scorecards, the souvenirs. They used the little pins with the bat and the ball hanging on them, and peanuts. This was the big thing. And we'd go there, we'd get a couple of seats. I was, of course, a bleacher kid as a kid, 60 cents. But when I was with my father, we generally sat in the lower deck in left field because I was a Pee Wee Reese fan. And I was a shortstop. So I've been watching Pee Wee. I learned something. $1.25.
Wow.
For the lower deck, and that's what we did. We did that very often, a lot. And like I said, the park was mostly, if not sold out, there was a lot of people there. I don't know what the average is for a million, but I guess it was when you had it weaker, it was made up for by. Don't forget, you also had doubleheaders. Now today
Scheduled doubleheaders too, not from rainouts.
one price. One price.
Single admission.
There was a doubleheader every holiday. 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day, always a doubleheader. And it was a lot of people like to go. You go out there, you see 2 games for the price of 1. Now they have, 6 hours in between, clear it out.
Day-night doubleheaders.
Pay again, and all that kind of stuff.
Split admission.
Yeah.
Well, now I have to bring up a sore subject, and that's the 1951 season.
What happened? What was it? I missed that. What was
See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Even to this day, more than over 65 years later, this is still a sore subject for Brooklyn fans.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you something. I interviewed Bobby Thompson for one of my books, The Boys of Brooklyn, because he played in the parade grounds in Brooklyn. Even though he was from Staten Island, he was on one of the all-star teams, the Hearst, one of the Journal American All-Stars. And he told me the story, which it's the first time I had heard it, that the Dodgers were interested in him, and he was in high school, and they couldn't touch anybody in high school. So the Dodgers told him, they said, "Look, before you sign, let us know, so we have a chance to make you an offer." And the day after he graduated, he signed with the Giants. He didn't tell anybody, didn't tell them. So I said to him, "Why didn't you tell the Dodgers?" He said, "Because I was a Giant fan." I said, "What were they? He said, "What were they going to give me? $100 more?" The money was not a factor. They weren't big money. But I said to myself, "Can you imagine if he had signed everything? History's all twisted around.
History would have been so out of whack."
Signed with the. And I'll tell you something else. I asked Carl Erskine. Now, Erskine was in the bullpen, and if you recall, there's a famous story. Clyde Sugforth is in the bullpen, the coach, and Dressen calls down there and he says, "How they look?" He says, "Branke's throwing pretty good." He says, "Erskine just bounced his curve." So supposedly he went for Branke. Now I said to Erskine, I said, "You threw an overhand curveball. That ball is supposed to bounce." So I would have thought you were being sharp. He said, "Well, I don't think that was it." He said he thought that the fact that Campanella wasn't playing, Campanella was hurt, Rube Walker was playing, and in the Polo Grounds, from home plate to the stands was like about 75 feet. And he said if I bounced one of those curves and it got past Walker, he was very slow, and he was probably afraid that might have caused more of a problem than anything else. And he thought that might have been the reason. Because to me, Branke was not the right guy. That's second guessing, but he was a fastball pitcher. Thompson hit a home run the day before, 2 days before. You had Branke, And although Labine wasn't throwing until after Branca came in, Labine or Erskine were really the best bet to come in because of Labine had the sinker, Erskine had the overhand curve. That's the ball that's the guy that should have come in. But
Well,
that's why it's such a great game.
I have to ask, though. During that regular season, the Dodgers got off to a really quick start. If I'm not mistaken, I think they had a double-digit lead that summer, didn't they?
13 games. Yeah.
13-game lead in the National League.
13 and a half. But that was just one day. It went right back to 13 because when they second game of a doubleheader or something like that.
What was the turning point to things changing against the Dodgers and for the Giants?
Well, when they had that lead in August, the Dodgers didn't fold up. They played just slightly over 500 ball. And when you look at you see a team playing 700 ball, they're not going to wind up that way. So there's going to be a slowdown someplace. So when they had this big lead, you figured they were going to start to level off a little bit. But the Giants went absolutely crazy. They won, 37 out of 44 or something. And that was the difference. They just kept winning. Of course, then later on when they came out with the sign story about stealing the signs, that kind of put a little damper on it for Giant fans, but it didn't change anything, of course. But I think that was it. I think the key was that the Giants just had such a great stretch in the last 6 weeks or so.
Well, if there is a bright side to this whole thing is that the next 2 seasons, the Giants would be on the outside looking in, and the Dodgers would win 2 straight pennants.
Yeah.
Still lost to the Yankees, but at least they got a taste of the World Series.
Yeah, well, they've won 4 out of the next 5 years, including the one World Series.
Let's discuss 1955 a little bit further. Some people thought that might have been the Dodgers' best team in a long, long time. When could you see that things were going to turn finally in Brooklyn's favor?
Well, first of all, they got off to a tremendous start. But that didn't mean too much because they were winning a lot of pennants. They won 6 pennants in those 10 years. The key was the World Series. And when it got to the World Series, remember, it shows you how baseball is. The Yankees won the first 2 games. Nobody had ever won the series after losing the first 2 games. And the funny thing was, so the Dodgers won the series. The following year, the Dodgers won the first 2 games, and then the Yankees came back and won this. So it happened 2 years in a row, and it had never happened in 100 years before that. But the key, obviously, I think it was just winning the 3 middle games. Because after they came home, and they won 3 games, and that turned the whole thing around. It was a little uncertain because the pitching was uncertain. I think Newcomb started the first game, then he had a bad arm, or he was something, and he wasn't prepared. I think Erskine didn't do particularly well, so you didn't know what to expect. Padres won that 3rd game, and Padres didn't have a big year, but then they had a couple of rookies. They had Don Bessett and Roger Craig. So it wasn't like a situation where you had 3 top pitchers going at it, and you could look at it. It was probably the first time that you thought you could win it was when Sandy Ambrose made that catch.
Oh, yeah.
And
that was
then you said, whoa.
Such a turning point when he robbed that ball from Berra that day at the stadium.
Earlier in that game, Phil Rizzuto was sliding into third and got hit with a batted ball. And Pee Wee Reese said, wait a minute, that's supposed to happen to us. So that they started to think maybe something's going to happen. But I really don't think it was really expected until the very end, until those last couple of innings.
And what made Amorose's catch even more impressive, he was practically playing towards left center field, way off the line. He actually had to race toward that left field line in order to start that play.
They estimated that he ran about 150 feet. They were playing around because they were figuring Berra to pull. And the pitch was a fastball up and out over the plate. And when when Berra hit, and Berra hit balls 2 feet over his head and off the ground, and this thing was, and it was slicing. It was slicing. And Padres said it was a fly ball. In fact, as soon as the ball was hit, he went over, picked up the Rosenberg. He was getting ready to throw to the next guy. And then he sees it slicing like that. And of course, there was a coincidence, well, not much more than a coincidence, that Ambrose was out there, because they took Gilliam was in left field, and Don Zimmer was at second base. And they pinch hit for Zimmer. Schuper pinch hit for Zimmer that inning. And then, so he took Zimmer out of the. So as Zimmer was out, he brought Gilliam in to play second base, and he put Ambrose out in left field. And because he was able to, he was a left-hander, so he was running straight away, and he stuck his hand out like that. They asked, I love quotes, when they ask these guys things and how they come back, the kind of quotes they come back with. They asked Ambrose, and he was Cuban, and he had a very heavy accent. And somebody said, how'd you do it? He says, I run like hell, I catch the ball. That was simple as that. Another one I think was Don Larson, because 50 years after the perfect game, somebody said to him, don't you get tired of talking about it? He says, no, why should I? Why should I get tired?
That was the one shining moment in his entire career.
That's right.
If I'm not mistaken, 1956 was probably the only good season that he had as a major league pitcher. Yeah. And he was a journeyman, too.
Yeah.
Yankees were one of just a bunch of teams that he played for.
His lifetime record was under 500. But you see, that shows, to me, that's what makes today's game such a fallacy. What they do with these pitches, it's disgraceful. I mean, they have this thing now, they say they don't want him to face 3 times around or something. Can you imagine if you took a Koufax or a Gibson or a Spahn out after 7 innings? I mean, the dugout would throw a party. And, when you're facing a pitcher and you can't hit him, I don't care if he's the best or the worst, that day you can't hit him. Once he's out of the game, hey, they can bring in Walter Johnson. It's not the same guy. That's the main thing. You're bringing in somebody else.
It's funny you mentioned Gibson, because someone told me about the time that Gibson actually had a bone in his leg broken from a line drive that was hit off him. And then the manager went to check on him. Gibson's like, what the hell are you doing here? Get off the dugout and get off the mound and go back into the dugout.
Yeah, he used to tell McCarver, Tim McCarver would come out to talk to him, and he'd say, get out of here. He said, the only thing you know about hitting is you can't hit it. He said, McCarver said that the manager said, you got to go out and talk to him. Gibson didn't want him out there. So McCarver solved the problem. He'd walk halfway out, and he'd say something, and everybody's happy.
And Gibson is one of the few guys to actually throw multiple extra inning complete games. He said that once in an interview, and he never, ever even heard of something called pitch counts back in his day.
It's ridiculous.
But this coming from a guy who pitched 14 innings, 12 innings, and 10 innings back to back.
Yeah. Well, you remember the 16-inning game between Juan Marichal and Warren Spahn? Marichal's 22 years old, and from the 10th, 11th, 12th inning, DeRocha kept saying, you okay? You want to go out there? He says, yeah. He says, if that old son of a gun can keep pitching, so can I.
Yep.
And they pitched 16 innings.
They took these things really, really seriously
but
back
what
then.
would you say about the guys, Leon Cador from the Dodgers and Joe Ossinger from the Boston Braves, 1920, 26 innings.
Amazing.
Now, I don't care how easy you're throwing or what you're throwing. I mean, 20. You mean you got to go out there and just keep throwing.
This leads to some more food for thought. Why do managers and pitching coaches continue to insist on pitch counts for games?
I don't know. My opinion, it's gotten into a point where I don't know if anybody will. They're starting to talk a little differently now, but I think it was when the big money came. They stopped hiring baseball people. The front office, they would hire guys with degrees in economics or something. And then the front office started to control what was going on the field. And that's what they do. They call managers, I've heard stories, they call managers right during the game to tell them things to do. We got to pitch this guy, we got to do that. And that was the thinking. The thinking was that somebody came up with this. I don't know where they got the 100 pitch from, but think about this. There's absolutely no sense at all, no common sense, no logic in the idea that every one of us are going to get tired at the same number of pitches. The three of us go out and throw pitches. I guarantee you one will get tired sooner than the other. It doesn't make any sense. And I watched them. You see it with the Mets this year because they have this guy named DeGrom.
Jacob DeGrom,
Yeah, and he pitches 7 innings. He's just as strong as he was at the beginning. He could pitch complete games, but they take him out and they lose games.
Yeah.
I saw Severino on the Yankees one day. His final pitch in the 7th inning was 100 miles an hour. These guys, so you got to take him out. He took him out of the game.
Yeah.
And they tied. They did win the game, but he didn't get credit because they tied the game with the bullpen. So it's really disgraceful. Leo Mazzoni, there's a lot of the ball players, but I guess they're old timers. A lot of baseball people who don't agree with it. Leo Mazzoni, who was a pitching guru, right? He said if you can't figure out that your pitch is getting tired without counting the pitches, you're not a baseball man. I mean, you know what's going on. You know. But that's why they're playing the game the way they do today. It's very hard. I got to the point where I turn it off after 6 innings. Once they take the starters out, I'm watching a pitching duel. It's a 1-1 game. Each one gave up 2 hits or something like that, and they're both out of the game. As far as I'm concerned, the game's over.
Yeah.
Turn it off. I go watch Blue Bloods. It's over.
Well, now I have to bring up a really sore subject, another sore subject with you.
You got a lot of them.
Yeah, well, 2 of them to be exact.
Right.
We already discussed
50.
1951.
Yeah.
Now there is the move to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Take us back to when the rumors first got started.
Yeah.
When did you hear about it, and how did you hear about it?
It would have been the year before 56, I guess, when they were starting to win. It started with, I think, when they announced that they were going to play 7 games in Jersey City, which to me, I still can't understand why they did that. What right did he have? It's like, somebody today saying, it's like the Yankees saying, well, we're going to go to Newark and play 6 games there next year. Why? What's the reason for? What's the purpose of it? Why would he get the authority to do that? So that started it in. But the thinking was constantly, they'll never leave because they'd kill O'Malley. And he said that himself when he had a conversation with, I can't think of the names now, the California people. That fellow was one of the representatives that was involved. And he said to him, we're coming. But he said, if you make it public, I'll deny it because these people will kill me.
Yeah.
But that was it. And then I remember when they used to, they had, people were saying, they had the pins, keep the Dodgers in Brooklyn, and they had these little things going on where they would, sometimes a politician would make a little talk about it and this and that and that and this. But it really wasn't positive until almost when they announced it.
Wow.
57 season, we started to realize, think about it. And the thing is, it was, even today, the story is wrong. They blame Moses. It's not right. And the other thing was that, I forgot what I was going to say. They blame Moses because he wouldn't give him, see, it was something called Title I, I think. It was a federal law, and they could, what's the word for taking over land? When they take over land.
Oh, wow. I think I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. Well, the government was allowed to take the land. Domain, yes. Yes, domain, thank you. And they can do that, but they had to use the land to do something that would benefit the community. Build a school, a hospital, or something like that. So all Moses said was that you can't do this because building a stadium for private profit is not helping the community. Is not the purpose of that thing. Now, I mean, maybe if Moses was a big Dodger fan and wanted them to stay, I'm sure he would work something out. But that's not the point. The point is he was, and nobody questions that they had to get out of Ebbets Field because the place was antiquated and they needed a bigger stadium. So it wasn't that, but I'm sure there could have been some place in Brooklyn when he somebody suggested that they go to where the Mets went.
Yeah,
City
Flushing
Park.
Meadows.
Flushing Meadows.
Ironically enough.
Yeah, but O'Malley said, well, wait a minute, it's not Brooklyn. Dodger fans would know it wasn't Brooklyn. So the Dodger fans said, well, didn't he think that we would realize Los Angeles wasn't Brooklyn either? You know, that's the way that was his. No, he saw the gold, and that's what he wanted. And I mean, he was the owner of the team. It's his right. However, Bill Veeck used to say, listen, you owe the community something, and you should give some consideration to the community, which he didn't do. He was going, as far as I'm concerned, he was going from 1946 on. His plan, it was a well-calculated plan. That's why he got rid of Ricky. Ricky wouldn't have left Brooklyn. He got rid of Ricky, and that was his plan, to go out there. But that's what happened.
How did this make every Brooklyn fan feel once the announcement of the move to L.A. was made? How did it personally make you feel?
Well, it was a shock, because it's the kind of thing we say, well, maybe it won't happen, but it was shocking. But it was so disillusioning or disappointing that a lot of us, I know it affected me, because I stopped watching baseball for a while. I never gravitated to the Mets. I would never gravitate to the Yankees.
Who would?
Well, I can't say that. No, you're rooting for the Dodgers. Why would you go to the Yankees? Same thing. The Yankees. Why would a Yankee fan become a Dodger fan? It didn't make sense. So to me, I just started losing interest. I was watching baseball, but I wasn't following it closely. And as the rest of the game started to go downhill, I got away from it to the point where I stopped watching it altogether.
Wow.
I started going to minor league games for a long time. Now I've been back again and watching it, but now I'm strictly a 6-inning watcher.
So we have these 3 books here. I'm going to give the names of each of these books. One is called Tearing Up the Pea Patch, The Brooklyn Dodgers of 1953, who, by the way, won the 4th of 6 pennants in the Jackie Robinson era.
Right.
And this was a really, really strong team that they had.
Yeah, that was, I said was the best National League team ever. But the Dodger players, a number of them were quoted as saying it was the best Dodger team of that era.
Here's something that I've been wanting to ask you about, and that's the book Caesars of the Diamond. Italian Americans in Major League Baseball between 1897 and 2017. There have been so many great Italian American ball players that have passed through the majors. Yeah. Joe DiMaggio probably being the most glorified and the most famous.
Yeah.
But do you feel that baseball has been lost on the Italian American sports fan or even the Italian American resident?
No, but I think that there's it's not the same today. You don't have the same pride, or I mean, if you maybe stop to think about it, a person, an ethnic person, or Italian American, hey, so and so is Italian. You might, oh yeah, wow, that's nice, but you're not aware of it as much, and you don't pay attention to it as much as you would have along the way, at least up until the 50s or so. After that, it started to lose it. I guess probably because first of all, the African American became the second-class baseball citizen, and then the Latino. The Italians had already gone through it, and they were past that. But there is another thing too, is that today you have such a mixture of ancestry. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these fellows, even Italian with Italian names, you find out that they're Italian and Irish and Scotch, and there's 4 or 5 different nationalities in there, mixed in there.
I mean, there are still a lot of good ball players of Italian American descent that are bouncing around in the majors.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Anthony Rizzo from the Cubs is one.
Joey Votto.
Joey Votto, who's with the Reds.
Votto.
Andrew Benintendi, who's with the Red Sox. Yeah. Here's one of my favorite names, Jared Saltalamacchia, who's bounced around with a whole bunch of different teams.
You know he has a record, don't you? The longest surname in the history of baseball.
That's interesting.
14 letters.
Wow.
Yeah. Saltalamacchia. It said they would. Now they have fun. They make jokes about it and all that. Whereas it used to be, they used to refer to them as the Walloping Wop, Dashing Dago, things like that. Now it's more for fun. Like Jared Saltalamacchia said, I don't know what it is. He said, but when my name is announced in the lineup, guys start making dinner plans. sounds like a food. Yeah.
It's interesting that we mention the ancestry of many ball players. And here's the third book that you have here. It's called The Boys of Brooklyn, The Parade Grounds, Brooklyn's Field of Dreams. We've gone from Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier to at one time having a really large percentage of African Americans in the game. Now we're lucky if we're going to be having maybe 10% of African Americans playing baseball right now, because it's not just whites or even Italian Americans for that matter. We've got guys from Puerto Rico, the Dominican, Colombia,
Asia.
Asia also, Japan, Korea, Taiwan as well. Also Curacao.
Yeah.
And of course, Yankee fans are very familiar with Didi Gregorius, who was born in Holland, but was actually raised in, it was either Aruba, he was actually raised in Curacao. And they're already doing advertisements for vacations to Curacao because of Didi Gregorius. That just goes to show you how much of an impact they've made. And it's funny that you mentioned, because now we have the World Baseball Classic. And it used to be where we had just the United States and Canada, Japan and Korea, and the Latin American countries. Now we've expanded to places like Spain, Russia, South America, South Africa, I should say.
The Netherlands, I think, too.
The Netherlands has been very strong lately.
Italy has professional baseball.
Italy has its own team, its own league over there.
Yeah.
Even Israel. Israel actually has its own summer league.
Yeah, you're right.
How does that make you feel, seeing the game being globalized that much?
Well, it's nice, I guess. I love the game, and I guess anything that would expand it. But to me, it's an American game. It basically comes from America, and it's always been that way. In talking about the Italians, immigrants came here, and baseball was something that once they learned what it was, they wanted to be a part of it. They became fans because it made them Americans.
And here in Staten Island, another Italian American who's now in the Hall of Fame, Frank Minichino, who played for the Athletics.
That's him right there. In this book, there are 8 Staten Islanders, and 7 of them are in the Staten Island Hall of Fame. Pretty interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we could talk about this for about 3 or 4 more hours, but unfortunately our time is up. So we definitely have to come back and talk about this next time.
Anytime.
It was so great to see you again.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Great to talk
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Whenever you feel like it, just drop by. We would love to say hello again.
I will do that. I'd love to.
We certainly hope that you enjoyed this really amazing trip down memory lane. And we certainly hope that you could join us next Monday night for another edition of In the Bleachers. So, for Andy and for everyone else, specifically Kenny Graham on the other side of the glass, I'm Jamie. Good night, everyone.